On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Steve Irwin, the Crocodile Hunter, was more than a television personality. He was a global ambassador for wildlife conservation. Born in 1962 in Australia, Irwin grew up surrounded by animals, shaping his fearless style and boundless enthusiasm for creatures most people avoided. With his khaki outfit, booming voice, and signature catchphrases, he turned wildlife documentaries into thrilling adventures, teaching millions to respect nature's most dangerous animals. On September 4, 2006, Irwin's extraordinary life came to a sudden and shocking end. While filming a documentary called Ocean's Deadliest near the Great Barrier Reef, he swam above a stingray. In a rare defensive strike, the stingray's barb pierced his chest, puncturing his heart. Despite desperate efforts to save him, Irwin died at just 44 years old. His death was accidental, yet tragically symbolic. The man who had spent his life dancing on the edge of danger, teaching us that fear could coexist with respect, was claimed not by a crocodile or shark, but by an animal known more for its elusiveness than its aggression. The world's reaction was immediate and immense. News outlets across continents stopped to cover his passing. In Australia, Prime Minister John Howard called him a great Australian icon. Fans left flowers at the gates of Australia Zoo, the sanctuary Irwin and his wife Terry had built. For many children who had grown up watching him, it felt like losing a beloved teacher. His funeral, broadcast to millions, became both a mourning and a celebration of his life's mission. Did his death amplify his legend? Absolutely. Irwin was already famous, but his sudden, almost mythic passing froze him in time. As the fearless wildlife warrior who gave his life in pursuit of knowledge and conservation, his death didn't halt his mission, it propelled it. Terry Irwin and their children, Bindi and Robert, have carried forward his work, keeping his voice alive for new generations. Steve Irwin's story reveals how mortality can elevate a mission into legacy. Humanity has always immortalized such figures through memorials, films, even everyday sayings. For Irwin, it is in conservation efforts, zoos, and the countless young biologists he inspired. His passing reminds us that death is inevitable, but purpose is eternal. Steve Irwin taught the world that courage and love for nature can outlast even the most tragic ending. His legend lives on, not in the shadow of his death, but in the vibrant call to protect the wild he so dearly loved. Joan Rivers was more than a comedian. She was a trailblazer. Born Joan Alexandra Malinsky in 1933, she clawed her way into a male-dominated comedy world with razor-sharp wit and fearless honesty. For decades, she pushed boundaries, often saying the unsayable, and in doing so, she opened doors for countless women in comedy. But her story ended as dramatically as her career had begun. Sudden, shocking, and surrounded by public attention. On September 4, 2014, Rivers went in for what was supposed to be a routine throat procedure at a Manhattan clinic. Complications arose. She stopped breathing during the procedure, went into cardiac arrest, and was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. After several days on life support, she passed away at the age of 81. Her death, though natural in the medical sense, carried the sting of irony. It came not from the chaos of show business, but from a procedure intended to maintain the very voice that had defined her career. The immediate aftermath was a cultural shockwave. Rivers had remained active, performing on stage and on television right up until the end. She was not a figure of the past. She was still present, still biting, still making headlines. Her death left a sudden silence in comedy, especially for women who saw her as both a mentor and a symbol of resilience in an unforgiving industry. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Fans and peers remembered her not only for her humor but for her relentless work ethic and her willingness to reinvent herself, from stand-up stages to red carpet commentary. Did her passing amplify her legend? Undeniably. Rivers had already carved her place in comedy history, but her sudden exit underscored the fragile line between presence and absence. She became a symbol of comedy's power to shock, to offend, to liberate, and of the risks that come with building a career on always going one step further. What does her death reveal about humanity's relationship with mortality and memory? It reminds us that we don't only remember people for how they lived, we remember them for how they exited. Rivers' death elevated her from a living icon to a cultural landmark. Through biographies, documentaries, and the comedians who cite her as inspiration, she remains alive in the fabric of entertainment. Joan Rivers' story proves that mortality may silence the voice, but it cannot mute the echoes of a life lived without fear. Her legacy, like her punchlines, still hits with precision, sharp, unflinching, unforgettable. Hervé Villechaize, the French actor best remembered as Tattoo from the hit television series Fantasy Island, lived a life caught between fame and personal struggle. Born in 1943, Villechaize rose to prominence in Hollywood with his distinctive voice, sharp wit, and undeniable screen presence. For a time, he embodied the magic of television's golden age of escapist entertainment. Yet behind the charm lay a man wrestling with deep pain. On September 4, 1993, Villechaize took his own life at the age of 50, dying from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His death was violent and tragic, but it also reflected the challenges of his time and of his own existence. Villechaize suffered from chronic health problems related to his dwarfism, including severe pain that plagued him for years. In an era when mental health and chronic illness were not openly discussed or supported as they are today, his suffering was largely endured in silence. His passing highlighted the hidden toll of fame and the neglect of deeper human needs in an industry focused only on outward appearances. The immediate reaction to his death was shock. Fans who had known him as the cheerful sidekick with the famous line, "De plane, struggled to reconcile the beloved character with the tragedy of the man behind it. For Hollywood, it was a sobering moment. Villechaize's death revealed that even those who brought laughter and fantasy into people's lives were often battling personal demons that remained unseen. In the years since, his death has amplified his legend in a bittersweet way. Villechaize became not just a quirky television figure, but also a symbol of the darker undercurrents of celebrity life. His story shifted from novelty fame to a cautionary tale about the need for compassion, for understanding, and for addressing the silent suffering that fame often conceals. What does his story reveal about humanity's relationship with mortality and memory? Villechaize reminds us that memory often softens reality. Fans continue to celebrate his work, revisiting Fantasy Island with affection, immortalizing him not for his end, but for the joy he brought. Art and entertainment serve as his legacy, ensuring that his voice and presence remain alive long after his passing. In the end, Hervé Villechaize's death speaks to the fragility of life and the weight of unseen burdens. His legacy reminds us that even within fantasy there is humanity, and that memory, through art, can transform tragedy into lasting remembrance. Irene Dunne was once hailed as the First Lady of Hollywood, a performer who moved effortlessly from screwball comedies to sweeping melodramas. Born in 1898, she embodied the grace and refinement of Hollywood's golden age. But her passing, like her life, was marked not by scandal or spectacle, but by dignity. On September 4, 1990, Dunne died in Los Angeles at the age of 91. The cause was natural, the quiet end of a long life lived largely outside the turbulence of late 20th century celebrity culture. By the time of her death, the entertainment industry had changed dramatically. Glitz had turned into tabloid frenzy, and fame was more fleeting than ever. Dunne's exit reflected a fading era when stars were revered less for controversy and more for their artistry, elegance, and restraint. The immediate consequences of her passing were subtle but deeply felt. Hollywood veterans and film historians mourned her loss, recognizing her as one of the last great links to the studio system's golden years. Unlike other stars whose untimely deaths amplified their legends, Dunne's long life offered something different: the preservation of her image as timeless, untouched by decline or scandal. She left behind a filmography that still glimmers with class: The Awful Truth, Love Affair, Showboat, and I Remember Mama. Her death also underscored a cultural truth. By 1990, America was already nostalgic for old Hollywood, and Dunne became part of that memory. She was more than an actress. She was a symbol of stability in a turbulent world. During the Depression and the war years, her films offered laughter, hope, and escape. Her passing invited audiences to look back not only at her roles but at the values they carried: resilience, wit, and heart. Did her death amplify her legend? Perhaps not in the dramatic sense, but it solidified her status as a cultural touchstone. She never courted fame for fame's sake, and in death, she reminded us that legacy can be built on quiet grace as much as spectacle. What do we learn from Irene Dunne's death about mortality and memory? That the way we live defines how we're remembered. She is immortalized not through tragedy but through her art, preserved in celluloid, revisited by new generations of film lovers. In a world where fame often burns fast and dies young, Irene Dunne remains proof that elegance, integrity, and talent can outlast even time itself. Steve Harwell, the unmistakable frontman of Smash Mouth, lived his life loud, unapologetic, and unforgettable. Born in 1967, he became the voice of a generation with hits like All Star and Walkin' on the Sun, songs that captured the carefree, ironic optimism of the late 90s and early 2000s. But behind the anthems of youth was a man struggling with personal demons. On September 4th, 2023, Steve Harwell died at just 56 years old. The cause was liver failure, brought on by years of alcohol abuse. His passing wasn't sudden or shocking in the way of a tragic accident. It was the slower, harsher reality of addiction taking its toll. In many ways, his death mirrored the values and excesses of his era. The 90s alternative rock scene celebrated rebellion, indulgence, and hedonism. But the aftermath revealed the cost. Artists often paid with their health, their peace of mind, or their lives. The immediate consequence of his death was a wave of nostalgia and reflection. Fans flooded social media, sharing clips of All Star, a song immortalized by its use in Shrek and countless pop culture moments. Younger audiences who had grown up with the soundtrack of Smash Mouth rediscovered the band's place in their childhood memories. Harwell's passing didn't just mourn the loss of a singer, it reignited the cultural weight of a song that had already become a generational anthem. Did his death amplify his legend? In a sense, yes. Steve Harwell wasn't seen as a larger-than-life rock god, but as the everyman frontman whose voice was instantly recognizable. His passing reminded people that even figures tied to lighthearted joy face the darker realities of life. It shifted his story from novelty fame to something deeper, a cautionary tale about fame, excess, and fragility. And yet, he remains immortal. Every time somebody once told me, blares through a speaker, Harwell's voice lives again. His death reminds us of humanity's complex relationship with mortality. We grieve, but we also celebrate, turning songs into monuments. In art, in memes, in endless replays, Steve Harwell continues to echo, proof that memory doesn't fade, it adapts. In the end, Harwell's departure wasn't just the end of a singer's life. It was a reminder that joy, even when touched by tragedy, has the power to outlast death. Through music, we don't just remember, we keep singing. Giorgio Armani's passing on September 4, 2025 in Milan marked the end of an era. He died peacefully at the age of 91, a natural death that mirrored the quiet dignity with which he lived his private life, even as his public persona reshaped global fashion. Unlike artists or rulers whose deaths came with violence or scandal, Armani's departure reflected the modern value placed on legacy, how creative vision and empire building can outlast the individual. His story began in hardship. Scarred as a child during World War II, Armani transformed pain into discipline, and discipline into beauty. By the 1970s, his sleek, minimalist designs had broken with the excess of post-war fashion. He invented a new aesthetic: soft tailoring, neutral palettes, elegance without pretense. And with it, he redefined the image of power itself. From Hollywood's red carpets to the boardrooms of New York, Armani became shorthand for sophistication. At the time of his death, his company was worth billions, spanning clothing, hotels, even sports. Yet Armani had never taken his empire public, ensuring it remained under his strict control. His passing, therefore, immediately raised questions. Who would carry the torch? Could an empire built so closely around one man's eye for detail survive without him? These questions reflected a timeless tension. When a visionary dies, does the vision endure? Armani's death amplified his legend in the way all icons are remembered. Just as Coco Chanel's passing sealed her as a symbol of French chic, Armani's quiet exit solidified him as the eternal face of Italian elegance. His name will continue on labels, buildings, and in the memories of those who first saw Richard Gere step into an Armani suit in American Gigolo, a cinematic moment that fused fashion with cultural mythology. But beyond business, Armani's story reveals humanity's deeper relationship with mortality. His life showed how creativity can be an act of defiance against time, how fabric and form can make fleeting moments feel eternal. In death, he is not simply mourned as a designer, but commemorated as a storyteller who used clothes to capture the essence of an age. Gustavo Cerati, the legendary Argentine musician and frontman of Soda Stereo, was more than a rock star. He was the voice of a generation across Latin America. His music fused rock, pop, and experimental sounds, shaping the identity of rock en español and pushing its boundaries far beyond Argentina. Yet his life ended not in a blaze of performance, but in silence. In May 2010, after performing in Caracas, Venezuela, Cerati suffered a massive stroke. It left him in a coma from which he would never awaken. For over 4 years, his fans clung to hope, visiting him, playing his music at hospital vigils, and flooding the world with tributes. But on September 4, 2014, at the age of 55, Cerati died in Buenos Aires from respiratory arrest. His death was natural in cause, but its drawn-out, agonizing process reflected a modern era's confrontation with medical technology, the ability to keep life suspended, hovering between hope and inevitability. The immediate aftermath was one of collective mourning. Argentina declared days of remembrance, while fans across Latin America poured into the streets, blasting Soda Stereo classics like De Musica Ligera. His funeral drew thousands, transforming into a celebration of the music that defined an era. In that moment, Cerati's death amplified his legend, elevating him from beloved musician to eternal cultural icon. His passing shifted more than just memory. It reinforced the unifying power of Latin American rock. Generations who had grown up with his songs recognized that his voice carried not only melody, but also identity. His departure was a reminder of the fragility of even the greatest artistic forces, yet also a testimony to how art transcends mortality. What does Cerati's story tell us about humanity's relationship with death and memory? It shows that while mortality silences the body, it cannot silence influence. Cerati's music continues to live in radios, stadiums, and headphones, immortalizing him as a poet of sound. Through tribute concerts, documentaries, and endless plays of his catalog, fans have ensured that his spirit lingers, not as an echo, but as a constant refrain. In the end, Gustavo Cerati's death reveals that art can defy time. Mortality may claim the artist, but memory, fueled by song, ensures the voice will never truly fade. Tughril Beg, the founder of the Seljuk dynasty, was not only a warrior but a statesman who reshaped the Islamic world in the 11th century. Born into the Oghuz Turkic steppe tribes, he rose from obscurity to become the man who ended the fragmentation of Persia and restored unity under Sunni Islam. His death, though natural, carried consequences that revealed the fragile balance of power in his era. Tughril died in 1063 in Rayyi, Persia, at around 70 years old. Unlike many conquerors who met violent or dramatic ends, his passing was from illness, the culmination of a long and demanding life spent on campaign and in governance. Yet the calm of his death contrasted sharply with the turbulence of the world he left behind. Tughril had united vast territories, stretching from Central Asia to Baghdad, but he left no direct heir. This ignited a succession crisis, a reminder that even the greatest empire builders could not control the future once mortality struck. The immediate consequences were profound. Rival claimants within the Seljuk family fought for dominance, creating rifts that threatened the empire's stability. Ultimately, his nephew Alp Arslan secured power, carrying forward Tughril's legacy by expanding the empire and laying the groundwork for the Seljuks' decisive role in the coming crusades. Tughril's death, therefore, amplified his legend, not by ending his empire, but by cementing the dynasty he had forged. Historically, his passing also marked a turning point for the Abbasid Caliphate. Tughril had defended the caliph from Shia Buyid domination, positioning himself as the sword of Sunni Islam. His death highlighted the era's central theme, the struggle between faith, power, and legitimacy. It was a reminder that rulers were not just political figures, but guardians of spiritual order, and their deaths could disrupt both worldly and religious stability. What does Tughril's story tell us about humanity's relationship with mortality and power? It shows how fragile even the strongest empires are when tied to the life of one leader. Yet it also shows how memory can transform mortality into immortality. Tughril is remembered not through tombs or monuments, but through chronicles that praise him as the unifier of Persia and protector of Islam. In the end, Tughril's death reminds us that while rulers pass, the legacies they carve, through faith, conquest, or governance, become part of history's fabric, immortalized in the stories we continue to tell.